According to animal experts, grizzly bears typically avoid attacking humans unless they feel threatened or startled. However, this isn't always the case. Hunger can drive grizzlies to become aggressive, leading them to venture into human settlements and attack. In this story, we explore how the desperation of hunger led bears to target even children. In the remote reaches of Siberia, where the land stretched out into vast, unyielding wilderness, winters were unforgiving. Villages dotted the harsh terrain, small clusters of humanity defying nature's brutal reign. One such village was Barishki, a small, close-knit community huddled at the edge of a dense forest. Life in Barishki was simple, defined by the rhythms of the seasons, the changing of the river's tides, and the ever-present danger that lurked in the wilderness beyond. As the winter of 2019 dragged on, it became evident that this year would be one of the harshest in recent memory. Snowfall had come early, blanketing the village in a deep, suffocating layer of ice and snow. Temperatures plummeted, plunging to extremes that even the hardiest of the village's inhabitants found challenging to endure. The people of Barishki knew how to survive the cold, but this winter tested even their considerable resilience. Food supplies dwindled, and the surrounding forests, once teeming with game, were eerily silent, as if the very wildlife had been driven to desperation. The villagers were not the only ones struggling. In the dense forests that surrounded Barishki, the grizzly bears, the undisputed rulers of the Siberian wilderness, were facing their battle for survival. The unbearable cold and the scarcity of food had driven them closer to human settlements in search of sustenance. The bears' desperation had become a growing concern in Barishki. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of recent sightings of bears creeping too close to the village, their massive forms moving through the snow like shadows in the night. The children were warned to stay indoors after dark, and the men of the village began to keep a closer watch on the forest's edge. The threat was real, and it was only a matter of time before the bears, driven by hunger, would grow bolder. In the heart of the village, where the snow was trampled into hard-packed paths leading from house to house, a small school stood. It was a modest building constructed of sturdy logs and stone, designed to withstand the bitter Siberian winters. Every day, despite the cold, the children of Barishki would gather there to learn their lessons and find warmth in the company of friends. The school bus was a lifeline for the children living on the outskirts of Barishki, those whose homes were too far to reach by foot in the cold. The bus, an old, battered vehicle that had seen better days, was driven by Timur Goryunov, a man as tough and resilient as the land he called home. Timur was a former military man and a veteran of conflicts in distant lands, but now he found peace in the quiet routine of ferrying the village children to and from school. One day, the morning had dawned cold and clear, the sky a pale, icy blue. The sun, a weak orb in the sky, cast long shadows over the snow-covered landscape. Timur had made his usual rounds, picking up the children from their homes, the bus rumbling and groaning as it plowed through the snow. The children, their breath fogging the windows, huddled together for warmth, their laughter and chatter a welcome sound in the otherwise silent world. It happened in an instant. As the bus approached a narrow stretch of road flanked by dense trees, a massive shape burst from the forest with terrifying speed and power. It was a grizzly bear, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes wild with hunger. The bear, driven to the brink of madness by starvation, charged the bus, its primal instincts overriding any sense of caution. Timur barely had time to react as the bear collided with the side of the bus, the force of the impact rocking the vehicle on its axles. The children screamed in terror as the bear reared up on its hind legs, its massive paws slamming against the side of the bus, leaving deep gouges in the metal. The bus, old and fragile, shuddered under the onslaught. The bear, sensing the presence of food inside, smashed one of its powerful forelegs through a window, the glass shattering in a spray of sharp fragments. Timur's heart pounded as he realized the severity of the situation. He had faced danger before, but never had the stakes been so high. Never had he been responsible for so many lives. At that moment, Timur's military training kicked in, his mind working with the precision of a well-oiled machine. He knew that the bear was driven by hunger, its desperation making it unpredictable and incredibly dangerous. He had to act quickly or the situation would spiral out of control. Without hesitation, Timur slammed his hand down on the bus's horn, the blaring sound echoing through the forest. The bear, startled by the noise, hesitated, its attention momentarily diverted. Timur seized the opportunity, throwing the bus into gear and flooring the accelerator. The bus lurched forward, the tires spinning in the snow before finally gaining traction. The bear, disoriented and confused by the sudden noise and movement, was forced to let go of the bus, its claws scraping against the metal as it fell back onto all fours. Timur kept his hand on the horn, the continuous blare serving as a deterrent as he sped down the road, putting as much distance as possible between the bus and the enraged animal. Inside the bus, the children clung to their seats, their eyes wide with fear, their voices silenced by the shock of what had just happened. Timur's heart raced, but his hands remained steady on the wheel, his focus entirely on getting the children to safety. The road seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, the trees began to thin, and the outlines of the village came into view. The sight of the familiar rooftops and the plume of smoke rising from chimneys was a welcome relief. Timur drove the bus straight to the school, pulled up to the front entrance, and came to a stop with a jolt. He quickly turned off the engine and jumped out, rushing to the side of the bus where the window had been shattered. The damage was extensive, the metal bent and twisted, the glass completely gone. Blood from the bear's paw was smeared across the side of the bus, a stark reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The school staff, alerted by the sound of the horn and the sight of the damaged bus, quickly gathered the children inside, their faces pale with shock. Timur stood by the bus, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had done it. He had kept the children safe. Timur was hailed as a hero for his quick thinking and bravery, his actions preventing what could have been a far worse disaster. But the former soldier knew that luck had played a role as well. The Callaways were deeply familiar with the rugged wilderness of Wyoming. Ellery, an experienced outdoorsman, had spent countless hours hunting, fishing, and hiking through the wilds, and his wife, Lark, though less seasoned, had grown to cherish the rugged beauty of their remote retreat. Their children, Sage and Boone, thrived in the wild, their days filled with exploration and adventure. The cabin was their sanctuary, a place where they felt secure, enveloped by the majesty of nature. Yet the Wyoming wilderness was not merely a playground. It was a place of raw, untamed power, where nature could assert its dominance in sudden and unpredictable ways. The Callaways were acutely aware of this, always respecting the land and its wild inhabitants. They stored their food carefully, took precautions against wildfires, and always carried bear spray when venturing into the backcountry. However, even the most meticulous preparations couldn't account for every possibility, and the wilderness had its way of reminding them who was indeed in charge. The family had arrived at their cabin the week before, eager to enjoy the final days of summer before fall's cold winds swept through the mountains. Ellery spent his mornings fly fishing in a nearby stream, while Lark and the children roamed the woods, gathering wildflowers and berries. By late afternoon, they would return to the cabin, tired but content, ready to settle in for a quiet evening. The cabin, well stocked with provisions, was filled with the scents of spices, dried herbs, and the smoky aroma of the wood-burning stove. The Callaways took pride in their self-sufficiency and in their ability to live off the land. But another creature was also seeking sustenance as the days grew shorter. A cinnamon bear, driven by hunger, had been roaming the area. This imposing bear, with its reddish-brown fur and robust build, had learned to associate human dwellings with easy meals. Drawn by the scent of food wafting from the Callaway cabin, the bear approached as the sun set, moving silently through the trees. Inside, the Callaways remained blissfully unaware of the danger outside. Ellery prepared dinner while Lark and the children played a board game at the kitchen table, their laughter filling the room. Meanwhile, the bear circled the cabin, its dark eyes glinting as it assessed the best point of entry, undeterred by the presence of people. The windows were shut, but the scent of food still seeped through small cracks in the old wooden structure, guiding the bear closer to its goal. The evening had been calm, the kind of serene night that lulled the Callaway family into a sense of security within their remote cabin. But that peace was violently shattered by a sudden loud crash. The sound was unmistakable, glass splintering as something massive forced its way inside. The smell of food, which had likely wafted from the kitchen earlier, had drawn a hungry bear to their doorstep. Driven by its ravenous appetite, the bear had smashed through one of the cabin's windows, the noise echoing through the small space and sending waves of terror through the Calloway family. Ellery Calloway, who had been calmly preparing dinner, dropped the knife he was holding, his heart hammering in his chest. He turned to see the enormous form of the bear, now entirely inside the cabin, its bulk filling the once cozy room with a palpable sense of danger. The bear's powerful jaws hung open, emitting a low, threatening growl that reverberated through the walls, which now seemed to close in on the family. Driven by hunger, the bear moved directly to the kitchen, its nose leading it to the pantry where the Calloways stored their food. The beast began tearing through the shelves, its claws raking through jars, sending their contents spilling across the floor. The cabin was filled with the sounds of breaking glass, heavy breathing, and the bear's relentless search for sustenance. Ellery knew they couldn't afford to wait for the bear to leave on its own. The animal was unpredictable, and its growing agitation posed a direct threat to the family. His mind raced, searching for a solution. Then, in a flash of clarity, he remembered reading about using vinegar as a deterrent for bears. The firm, pungent smell could overwhelm a bear's sensitive nose, driving it away. Wasting no time, Ellery grabbed a spray bottle of vinegar from under the sink. He signaled to his wife, Lark, to move their children, Sage and Boone, to the far corner of the room, away from the bear. His heart pounded as he approached the bear cautiously, aware of the danger but determined to protect his family. The bear was still engrossed in the pantry, its head buried in a box of cereal it had pulled from the shelf. Ellery took a deep breath, aimed the spray bottle, and squeezed the trigger. A fine mist of vinegar filled the air, and the effect was immediate. The bear jerked its head up, its nose wrinkling in disgust. It shook its head violently, letting out huffs and snorts as it tried to rid itself of the offensive smell. Ellery continued to spray, the acrid scent saturating the air and causing the bear to back away from the pantry, clearly agitated. But the bear wasn't ready to surrender its search for food. It turned its gaze on Ellery, taking a menacing step toward him. In a quick decision, Ellery grabbed a metal pot from the stove and banged it loudly with a wooden spoon. The noise reverberated through the cabin, startling the bear. Lark, catching on to Ellery's plan, began clapping her hands and stomping her feet. Sage and Boone, sensing the urgency, joined in, creating a cacophony that filled the small space. The combined assault of noise and the overpowering smell of vinegar proved too much for the bear. It let out a frustrated growl, then turned toward the broken window. With a final longing glance at the pantry, the bear decided the meal wasn't worth the trouble. It lumbered through the jagged opening it had created earlier, pausing briefly outside the cabin to glance back at the light spilling from inside, before disappearing into the night. As silence returned to the cabin, the Calloways stood frozen, their breaths ragged as they processed what had just transpired. The bear was gone, but the aftermath of its visit was unmistakable. The kitchen was in disarray, with broken jars and scattered food littering the floor. Cold air seeped in through the shattered window, a stark reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Relieved but shaken, the family confirmed that the bear had left. They quickly packed their belongings and left the cabin, returning to the safety of the city and leaving behind the terrifying experience in the dark, remote wilderness. In the remote wilderness of British Columbia, where dense forests stretch endlessly and jagged mountain peaks rise into the sky, a couple set out on what they expected to be a peaceful, rejuvenating hike. Richard and Margaret, seasoned hikers with a deep love for the outdoors, were drawn to this untamed land for its breathtaking beauty and tranquil solitude. Richard, a tall man with a sturdy build, found solace in nature, a passion passed down from his mountaineer father. Margaret, with her slender frame and quiet strength, shared his love for the wild. They had spent countless weekends hiking in England, but the rugged wilderness of British Columbia offered a new challenge they eagerly embraced. Their hike began under a brilliant blue sky, the air crisp with the scent of pine. The trail wound through dense forests, revealing stunning vistas of snow-capped mountains and deep glacial valleys. The solitude of the path heightened their sense of connection to the landscape, making them feel both exhilarated and humbled by the vastness around them. Aware they were in bear country, they carried bear spray, a whistle, and an air horn, and had reviewed safety protocols. These precautions, ingrained from years of experience, were a natural part of their wilderness routine. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor, they reached a section of the trail that was particularly dense with undergrowth. The trees here were older, their gnarled roots twisting across the path and forcing the couple to navigate carefully. It was in this stretch of the trail that the peacefulness of their hike began to shift, subtly at first, but with a growing sense of unease. Richard and Margaret exchanged a glance, both feeling the same inexplicable tension. They slowed their pace, their senses heightened as they scanned the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. It was Margaret who first spotted the bear. She froze mid-step, her eyes locking onto a large, dark shape moving through the underbrush about 50 meters ahead. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. A grizzly bear, massive and powerful, its shaggy fur a deep brown that almost blended with the shadows of the trees. Richard followed her gaze and immediately saw it too, his heart beginning to race. The bear hadn't noticed them yet. It was strolling, its massive head swinging from side to side as it sniffed the air, searching for food or perhaps just investigating its territory. For a moment, the couple remained still, hoping the bear would continue on its way, unaware of their presence. But then the bear stopped. It raised its head higher, its nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. The bear turned in their direction, its dark eyes fixing on them. There was a moment of tense stillness, the kind that stretches time and makes each second feel like an eternity. Then, to their horror, the bear began to move toward them. It wasn't charging, but its approach was deliberate and unnerving. Richard and Margaret knew enough about bear behavior to recognize that this was not a curious animal simply passing by. The bear had decided to investigate them, and in the wild such encounters could quickly turn dangerous. They had little time to react. The couple slowly began to back away, keeping their eyes on the bear without turning their backs. The trail behind them led to a large rock formation, one they had passed earlier and noted as a good vantage point for a rest. Now it seemed like their only hope. They moved cautiously, trying not to trigger the bear's predatory instincts, but the bear continued to close the distance, its massive paws crunching leaves and twigs underfoot. As they reached the base of the rock formation, Richard and Margaret knew they had to act quickly. The rock was about 3 meters high, a steep but climbable surface with enough handholds to provide a quick ascent. Without speaking, they moved in unison, Richard boosting Margaret up first before pulling himself up after her. The bear was less than 20 meters away now, and its pace was increasing, its posture becoming more aggressive. From their perch on the rock, they could see the bear more clearly. It was enormous, easily weighing over 300 kilograms, with a thick, muscular build that spoke of immense power. Margaret's hands trembled as she fumbled with the bear spray, finally unclipping it from her belt. Beside her, Richard was ready with the air horn, his thumb hovering over the trigger. They both understood the gravity of the moment. The next few seconds could determine whether they would walk away unharmed or face the full wrath of the approaching grizzly. If the bear advanced further, they would have to act in unison, using the spray and horn together to scare it off, hopefully. The bear was now within 10 meters, its pace slowing as it assessed the situation. The massive animal's deep, rumbling breaths were clearly audible to the couple. Each movement of the bear radiated power, and they could see the scars across its snout, remnants of past battles. Whether with other bears or humans, they could only guess. This was not just any bear. It was a seasoned, battle-hardened predator, and they were intruding on its territory. Richard made the first move, pressing down on the air horn's button. The piercing blast shattered the quiet of the forest, echoing through the trees. The bear flinched, its ears flattening against its skull as it let out a low, menacing growl. Margaret seized the moment, raising the bear spray and unleashing a potent burst directly at the bear's face. The response was immediate. The bear recoiled, shaking its head furiously as the noxious spray hit its nose and eyes. A loud guttural roar erupted from the animal, reverberating through the forest and sending a chill down the couple's spines. But despite the intense discomfort, the bear's retreat was gradual. It backed away slowly, snarling as it swiped at the air, desperate to rid itself of the burning sensation. Richard and Margaret stood frozen, their hearts pounding as they watched the bear retreat. It stopped several meters away, still growling and squinting against the pain. For a brief moment, it seemed to contemplate another attack, but finally, it turned and lumbered back into the forest, its enormous form fading into the shadows. Even after the bear disappeared, the couple remained on the rock, their bodies stiff with adrenaline. The forest around them, which had been alive with the sounds of nature just minutes before, was now eerily silent. The reality of their narrow escape slowly dawned on them. Their quick thinking and knowledge of bear safety had likely saved their lives. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Richard and Margaret cautiously climbed down from the rock, their legs shaky but functional. They knew they had to leave the area quickly, just in case the bear returned or if there were others nearby. They retraced their steps along the trail, moving briskly but carefully, their senses heightened for any signs of danger lurking in the wilderness. The sun dipped low over the village of Kalugamua, casting shadows on the dusty streets and thatched roofs of its humble homes. Located at the edge of a protected forest in central Sri Lanka, the village moved to the natural rhythms of the land. The forest, dense with ancient trees and hidden creatures, was both a sanctuary and a boundary for the villagers. For generations, the people of Kalugamua lived in harmony with the forest, taking only what they needed. But the forest had begun to shrink in recent years, cleared for tea plantations and farmland. The animals, once deep within the forest, were being driven closer to the village as their habitats dwindled. The villagers noticed these changes, crops trampled at night, strange tracks near the forest edge. Some whispered of disturbed spirits, while others, like Wasana, an older woman with deep knowledge of the forest, understood that the animals were becoming desperate. The silence of the birds, once abundant, troubled her most. Their absence hung heavily over the village. On a pale morning, the village market was quieter than usual, with a sense of unease in the air. Wasana, sorting through vegetables, listened to the murmurs of worry. She had seen the signs, but there was little she could do now except wait. As the day warmed, the villagers settled into their routines, but the fragile peace was soon shattered. A low, rumbling growl, deep and ominous, echoed through the market. Wasana's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the sound. A sloth bear, a creature rarely seen near the village, was approaching. These bears were typically shy and avoided humans, but this one was different. The bear emerged from the forest, its dark fur matted and its movements swift. Fear gripped the villagers. Some ran, others screamed, but most stood frozen, unable to comprehend the danger that had come to their doorstep. The bear, confused by the sudden noise and movement, hesitated, but hunger drove it forward. Its nose twitched as it caught the scent of food, and it advanced toward the market. Villagers, sensing danger, abandoned their stalls, retreating in fear. The bear's eyes locked on a pile of ripe bananas, its stomach growling in anticipation. Wasana, standing at the center of the market, watched in horror. She knew the bear wasn't inherently aggressive, but desperation made it unpredictable. As the bear neared the market, it began sniffing around the closest stall, its hunger overpowering its fear. The villagers panicked. Some men grabbed sticks and stones, ready to defend their homes. Others turned to Wasana, the village elder, for guidance. Understanding the urgency, Wasana stepped forward, knowing violence would only worsen the situation. The bear needed to be guided back into the forest. She calmly instructed the villagers to gather anything that could make noise, pots, pans, sticks, and form a loose circle around the bear. On her signal, they created a cacophony that echoed through the market. The bear, startled by the noise, paused, uncertain, but its hunger remained strong. It lunged at a nearby stall, scattering fruit. The villagers intensified their efforts, but Wasana realized noise alone wouldn't drive the bear away. The bear needed a reason to leave, something more enticing than the market's chaos. She motioned to a group of young men who quickly gathered discarded food from the market's edge. They spread the scraps in a trail leading back to the forest. The bear, sniffing the air, hesitated again. Slowly it turned toward the forest, tempted by the promise of a more leisurely meal. With the villagers' continued efforts, the bear finally decided to follow the trail, lumbering back into the forest, leaving the village with intense relief. With a low growl, the bear began to move away from the market, following the trail of food. The villagers, sensing victory, maintained their noisy onslaught, guiding the bear step by step back toward the forest. The bear, now more interested in the food than the market, lumbered along the trail, occasionally stopping to eat. It took several tense minutes, but eventually the bear reached the edge of the forest. The villagers, exhausted but relieved, watched as the bear disappeared into the trees. The noise gradually died down, replaced by the sounds of the forest and the murmurs of the villagers as they discussed what had just happened. Wasana stood in the center of the market, her heart still pounding from the encounter. She knew that this was not the last time the village would face such a situation. The forest was shrinking, and the animals were being driven to the brink. The bear's appearance in the town was a stark reminder of the fragile balance between human civilization and the natural world. As the villagers began to clean up the mess left behind, Wasana's thoughts turned to the future. The encounter had shown her the importance of being prepared and of understanding the needs and behaviors of the animals that lived on the edge of their world. She knew that they could not rely on luck alone to keep them safe. The village would need to find ways to coexist with the wildlife that was being pushed closer to their homes. As the sun dipped low over the Ozark Mountains, its golden light bathed the rugged landscape, drawing campers and adventurers eager to escape daily life. Among them was the Brewer family from Harrison, Arkansas, set to spend a long weekend in one of the Ozark's most popular campgrounds. The Brewers were seasoned campers, well-versed in the rhythms of outdoor life. Tom, the family's patriarch, had meticulously planned their trip, from the best routes to the most scenic trails. His wife, Marla, shared his enthusiasm, especially for the relaxation that camping offered, quiet mornings with a book by the campfire, and peaceful nights under a starry sky. Their teenage children, Sarah and Jake, though less enthused, appreciated the break from their daily routines. Arriving at the campground, they were welcomed by the scent of pine and the hum of cicadas. The campground, a favorite among locals and tourists alike, was dotted with tents and RVs. The Brewers chose a secluded corner near the lake where they planned to fish and swim. After setting up camp and preparing the fire pit, they settled in for their first evening. The crisp air hinted at autumn, and the smell of burning wood mingled with the aroma of their dinner: hot dogs, corn on the cob, and foil-wrapped potatoes. As night fell, the campground grew quiet, with distant laughter and crackling fires giving way to the wilderness's symphony. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush reminded the Brewers of the wildlife surrounding them. Before bed, Tom retrieved a flashlight from the SUV and caught a whiff of the donuts they'd bought earlier. He intended to secure the food in a cooler, but in the evening's flurry, he forgot. The Brewer family slept soundly, lulled by the gentle breeze and forest sounds. The night passed uneventfully, and morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on the campground. Tom awoke early, brewed coffee over the fire, and relished the serenity of the morning. The day unfolded perfectly, with hikes through the Ozark trails revealing breathtaking valley views and wildflowers in vibrant bloom. At the lake, they fished and swam, the cool water a refreshing escape from the afternoon heat. By evening, they returned to their campsite as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Dinner that evening was a hearty feast of freshly caught fish, grilled over the campfire with a side of roasted vegetables. The crisp night air was filled with laughter and the crackling of the fire, a perfect end to a day spent immersed in nature. As the evening wore on, the campground grew noticeably quieter. Many of the weekend campers had packed up and left, leaving the Brewers and a few other die-hard adventurers to enjoy the solitude. The family felt a deep sense of peace in the stillness of the night, the surrounding forest a silent sentinel under the starry sky. Unbeknownst to them, their tranquility was being observed. The Ozarks, with their dense woods and rugged terrain, were home to a variety of wildlife, including black bears known for their acute sense of smell and unyielding curiosity. Over time, these bears had learned that where there were humans, there was often food, an irresistible lure for an opportunistic scavenger. As the Brewers retired to their tent, a lone black bear roamed through the woods nearby, its keen nose leading it ever closer to the campground. This bear, a large adult male, had spent the day foraging in the forest, but now, under cover of darkness, the promise of an easy meal drew it toward the scent of food lingering in the air. The bear moved cautiously, its senses on high alert as it approached the unfamiliar smells and sounds of the campsite. The bear's sharp sense of smell led it straight to the Brewer's campsite, where the faint aroma of forgotten donuts in their SUV caught its attention. Silently, the bear approached the vehicle, its massive paws crunching softly on the gravel. Reaching the SUV, it pressed its nose against the window, fogging the glass as it sniffed eagerly. Inside their tent, the Brewers slept soundly, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The bear circled the SUV, its claws scraping against the door handles as it searched for a way inside. With a mighty swipe, it hooked its claws under a handle and effortlessly popped the door open. The door swung wide, and the bear immediately thrust its head inside, drawn by the irresistible scent of donuts. It squeezed its large frame through the opening, the seats creaking under its weight as it rummaged through the interior. In moments, the bear tore through the packaging and devoured the sugary treats. But the bear's hunger wasn't satisfied. It continued its search, knocking over a cooler and spilling its contents across the back seat. Bags of chips, a loaf of bread, and a package of cookies quickly met the same fate as the donuts. The bear's movements grew more frantic as it scattered food and belongings, leaving the SUV in disarray. The noise eventually woke Tom. Groggy and disoriented, he sat up, trying to make sense of the sounds outside. Initially, he assumed a raccoon had gotten into their trash, but the loud, forceful noises made him realize this was something more significant. Tom unzipped the tent and peered into the darkness. At first, everything seemed normal, the faint outlines of trees and the dim glow of the campfire. Then he saw the SUV's open door and the large, dark shape moving inside. His heart skipped a beat as he realized a bear was in their car. Instinctively, Tom wanted to shout, but he quickly reconsidered, knowing it might provoke the bear. Instead, he reached back into the tent, fumbling for the SUV's keys. With shaking hands, he finally pressed the panic button on the key fob. The SUV's alarm blared, shattering the night silence. Startled, the bear growled deeply and scrambled to back out of the vehicle. In its haste, it slammed against the door, shutting it as it bolted into the woods, vanishing into the shadows. The Brewers, now fully awake, could only watch in stunned silence as the forest swallowed the bear. Tom stood frozen, keys clutched in his hand, before finally exhaling in relief. The rest of the family, pale with fear, emerged from the tent and stared at the SUV as the alarm echoed through the quiet campground. Tom silenced it and cautiously approached the vehicle. The bear was gone, but the damage was evident. Food wrappers and gear were strewn everywhere. The seats were clawed and torn, and the spicy scent of wild animal musk lingered. As they surveyed the chaos, the Brewers realized how close they had come to disaster. The encounter was a stark reminder of the dangers of camping in bear country. Tom knew they had grown complacent, forgetting the critical importance of securing food in such a wild place. In the shadow of the Hohe Tauern National Park, where the dense forests of Austria unfurl in a tapestry of green and gray, lies a land untouched by the rush of modern life. The ancient trees, their trunks gnarled and thick, reach skyward as if attempting to pierce the heavens themselves. Among the verdant undergrowth and the towering pines, a solitary figure moves with deliberate, measured steps. This is Jacob Marshall, an experienced hiker seeking solace in the untouched beauty of this alpine wilderness. Jacob had long cherished nature's peace and quiet, finding a respite from the clamor of everyday life in its rugged landscapes. Today, he sought a new challenge in the sprawling beauty of Hohe Tauern, drawn by the promise of solitude and the chance to reconnect with the natural world. He had risen before dawn and prepared meticulously for his hike. His pack was well stocked with essentials: a map, compass, first aid kit, food, water, and importantly, bear deterrents. The latter, a necessity in bear country, included a whistle and bear spray, both of which he had tested and inspected before setting out. With the forest path stretching before him, Jacob felt a deep sense of contentment. The crisp mountain air filled his lungs, invigorating him with each breath. The morning they passed in peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. The forest was a mosaic of light and shadow, with sunbeams piercing through the canopy and casting fleeting patterns on the forest floor. Jacob moved steadily, taking in the serene beauty of the surroundings, the ancient trees, their leaves whispering secrets of the past, and the gentle babbling of a nearby stream. The trail meandered through dense thickets and open meadows, each turn revealing a new facet of the forest's grandeur. As noon approached, Jacob found himself in a less traveled part of the park, a region known for its breathtaking vistas and challenging terrain. It was here that Jacob noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere, a sense of unease that seemed to permeate the air. Jacob paused, his instincts alert. He scanned his surroundings, noting the unusual silence. The usual chirping of birds and rustling of small creatures had ceased, replaced by a tense stillness. It was a feeling he had encountered before in the wild, a premonition of danger. He was about to resume his hike when he heard a sudden, powerful movement from the underbrush to his left. The sound was unmistakable, a large animal pushing through the dense foliage. Jacob's heart quickened, and he turned cautiously in the direction of the noise. Emerging from the shadows of the forest was a brown bear, its massive form breaking through the undergrowth with an alarming speed. The bear's fur was a rich, dark brown, and its eyes were sharp, filled with an intensity that spoke of territorial aggression. Jacob's training kicked in immediately. He had encountered bear country before, and he knew the protocols for such encounters. He reached for his bear spray, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The formidable creature was clearly agitated. It roared a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the trees and began to advance toward him with a menacing stride. The bear's approach was calculated and determined. Jacob's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He knew that making oneself appear larger and more intimidating could sometimes deter a bear, but in this instance he had to rely on his deterrence. He unclipped the bear spray from his belt and positioned himself in a way that allowed him to use it effectively. He also prepared his whistle, knowing that the loud sound could potentially disorient the bear. With a quick but deliberate motion, Jacob activated the whistle, sending out a piercing, high-pitched sound that cut through the forest's silence. The bear flinched at the sudden noise, momentarily hesitating. Jacob continued to blow the whistle, its sound echoing through the trees, a racket designed to unsettle and drive the bear away. Simultaneously, he readied the bear spray. As the bear resumed its charge, Jacob discharged the spray in a wide arc. The robust and aromatic cloud of deterrent filled the air, creating an invisible barrier between him and the bear. The bear's progress was halted. It recoiled from the spray, its eyes narrowing in discomfort. The animal's initial aggression wavered as it was overwhelmed by the force of the spray and the relentless sound of the whistle. The bear paused, shaking its head and snorting in irritation. Jacob, maintaining his stance, continued to deploy the spray, making sure to cover the area between them. He kept the whistle going, its shrill tone a persistent reminder of his presence. The bear, clearly disoriented and deterred by the combination of noise and the bear spray's pungent odor, began to back away. The standoff, though tense, was relatively short-lived. The bear, realizing that its advance was met with significant resistance, retreated into the forest. It moved slowly at first, but then picked up speed as it disappeared into the thick undergrowth, leaving behind a disturbed silence. Jacob took a moment to catch his breath, his body still tingling from the adrenaline. He carefully stowed the bear spray and whistled back into his pack, taking time to compose himself before returning to where he had started. His experience had proven invaluable, and the encounter had reinforced the importance of being prepared and knowledgeable in bear country.